Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Claire Healy, and I run the DC office of E3G. And we're delighted today to partner with the Atlantic Council to host today's discussion of the outcomes of the US and EU Energy Council meeting. The US and EU Energy Council is the lead transatlantic coordination forum where both parties come together to talk about energy security and diversification, and of late, increasingly, the imperative to decarbonize. We are joined today with an excellent panel who are intimately involved with the Council discussions to share their perspectives and takeaways. The event is on the record, and we are live streaming on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and we'd love it if you would post about today's discussion using the hashtag AC Energy and tagging us at AC Global Energy and at E3G. We'll be actively moderating the Q&A chat box, looking for your questions to put to the panelists. We know there's a lot of interest. This is a very timely discussion, given the geopolitical turbulence and the ongoing situation in Ukraine. But one of the key issues we're trying to draw out today is, the balance of these issues at the Council meeting. And does this ongoing situation in Ukraine and gas crunch and these price fluctuations, does it speed up or slow down the energy transition? And to discuss these issues, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We're joined today by Dagmara Koska, who's Councillor and Deputy Head of Section for Global Issues and Innovation at the Delegation of the European Union in the United States. We're also joined by Andrew Light, Assistant Secretary for International Affairs at the United States Department of Energy, and my co-host, Ambassador Richard Morningstar, founding chairman of the Atlantic Center's Global Energy Center, multiple roles, but the one most relevant today, he was formerly US Ambassador to the European Union and Envoy for Eurasian Energy Affairs. And we're going to start the conversation by asking Ambassador Morningstar to share with us some context about the Council, because I believe, Ambassador, you were there at the creation in 2009. So if you could start by just telling us the purpose of the Council, why it exists, and your initial sort of takeaways from these discussions. Ambassador.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you to E3G for partnering with us with respect to this program. Yeah, I was there at the creation. In fact, I was there before the creation back in 2009. I first started talking with Hillary Clinton about US-EU Energy Council. And by the way, there's always been a name question, because in the US, we've called it the US-EU Energy Council, and in Europe, it's been called the EU-US Energy Council. So I think you'll probably hear those terms interchangeably today. But even before I started on the job as Envoy for Eurasian Energy, we talked about the possibility of setting up an energy council. And I thought it was really important because energy was becoming more and more important. Energy was discussed as a small part of the then Transatlantic Economic Council, the TEC, and frankly, it was getting buried, and felt that it was important that we have a dedicated effort with respect to energy. And she was fully behind it and said, go and set it up. So I worked with my counterparts in Europe. We got it set up. And I think it's somewhat unique is that the council is basically chaired by principals. And the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Energy on the American side, the High Representative for Foreign Policy and the Energy Commissioner on the European side. There's also, and I don't know if still the case, the Commissioner on Research and Technology. And so we started in 2009. We really focused during those first few years on geopolitical issues, a lot of which involving Ukraine, ironically. This was after the gas shut off in 2009 through Ukraine. And we really worked hand in glove and had working groups on the geopolitical side. It worked very well, maybe a little less well, okay, but less well on the research and technology side. I felt that the Energy Council sort of went somewhat dormant during the last administration. I think there was at least one meeting, maybe two. But it is really critical now that it be reinvigorated, and I think it has. I think we'll learn today that it has been reinvigorated, given the issues that you raised, Claire, and the importance both of energy security as well as the need to meet climate goals. Frankly, back in 2009, there was when we started the first few years, there was very little discussion, at least in the council, on climate. I think that rather than me going further at this point, it's important to hear from Andrew and Dagmara and also Keisuke from the IEA. So I will turn it back to you to reintroduce them, and then look forward to making more detailed remarks later.
Thank you for that overview. And I should have said, yeah, we're also joined by Keisuke Sadamura, who is Director of Energy Markets and Security at the International Energy Agency. So we're delighted you could join us from Paris, and we're looking forward to later hearing your takeaways, given your sort of recent roadmaps and analysis. But I think, should we start then with Andrew, Assistant Secretary for International Affairs? So Andrew, was this your first council meeting that you were involved with? I mean, I can't imagine a more timely discussion. What were your sort of main takeaways? And if you could talk a bit about the balance between the various objectives, like how US and EU come together to deal with these price fluctuations and potential disruption to the energy markets, and also then the need to diversify. If you could tell us about the balance that you sort of noticed in the discussions. Andrew.
Sure, and thanks very much for the invitation to join. So yes, we've only just passed the 1 year mark of the Biden administration, so this is indeed my first US-EU Energy Council. It actually meets by design every other year. There's discussion of increasing the frequency of it now. This is the third meeting of the council, and it is Ambassador. It is a 2+2 dialogue now. So it's just state and energy secretaries of state, secretaries of energy on our side, and then their two counterparts in the European Commission on the other side. I would sort of say that the meeting that we had on Monday, and this is a fairly difficult meeting to organize, just no less because it's not just a minister to minister, but you've got 4 leading ministers who you need to arrange schedules with. So it's a difficult one to put together logistically. It's also a lot of very intensive work that goes into this in terms of making sure that we're aligned on what are the topics that we need to address in the near term and in the longer term, and want to make sure that we have time and ample time to discuss all those. So as you might imagine, there's lots of sidebar meetings and individual bilaps that also go with this collection of leaders in the room along with the rest of us. It is a great opportunity in general, obviously, to discuss our common energy challenges and our common energy solutions. Obviously, this time, at this particular moment, the council is extremely concerned, or I should say the leadership in the council is extremely concerned with the ongoing crisis that we're seeing in Ukraine, the market fluctuations that we're experiencing right now with energy prices have been experiencing quite some time through this fall in Europe, and how to find a way forward. And so I don't think that these agendas are at odds, looking at the near-term solution, which is mostly focused on questions of, the weaponization of gas by the Russians in the case of Ukraine, and potentially in a conflict moving forward, as well as the longer-term decarbonization strategies, which obviously the Europeans are in some respects ahead of the United States right now on. And the Biden administration has been doing everything to catch up in terms of targets and plans and procedures, but also making sure that we're working together. It's revealed definitely, I think something that we all would agree on is that energy diversification, no matter what your view on energy, is absolutely paramount. That no one wants to be as beholden to any one supplier who can then potentially threaten to cut off supply, as we're seeing right now. To say a couple more words about the tenor of the discussion, I'd say that we're definitely focused on a variety of scenarios on what could happen with respect to Ukrainian energy supply and European energy supply if we were to see a shutdown of the Russian pipeline that goes through Ukraine. That's obviously a topic of discussion and one in which there's intensive action, for which this one council meeting on Monday is just indicative of an enormous amount of time in both the Commission and the US government in terms of trying to move forward and come to some resolution on this. Incidentally, if some may not know, but I think it was fairly prominent, just the week before we convened the council, President Biden and President von der Leyen released a standalone joint statement at the leader level on gas supply and gas security. So that even happened before we released the joint statement and had the in-person meeting that we had for the US-EU Energy Council on Monday. The United States is doing everything it possibly can with respect to its own resources. So far in 2022, in order to attend to the near-term problem, in 2022, there have been a total of 60 cargoes of US LNG that have landed or on their way to Northwest Europe, a number of them turning away actually from Asia, driven by the market prices that we're seeing in Europe, which we've seen a little bit of a stabilization recently, but obviously we want to look to the longer-term picture there. Approximately 2/3 of US LNG went to Europe, all of Europe, not just Northwest, in January. Normally, again, Asia is the largest import region, but that definitely has been a response to market signals. And I think that there's an abundant amount of analysis that's been looking at Norway, looking at North Africa, looking at other places, in which if we were to face some of the more dire scenarios that I think we have to look at in terms of a broader shutdown of gas supplies from Russia going into Europe, what might be done to close that gap. So I think that there is, and that's got to come from a variety of sources, obviously, and a variety of market factors. If you look at the joint statement, which I would encourage anyone who's tuning in to this session, I assume that you're driven here by your interest in the topic. I would take a look at the very carefully negotiated joint statement between the Commission and the U.S. government, which again involves a number of actors throughout the government, including White House, looking at what we're doing and what we're trying to communicate through the joint statement. There's definitely that sense of urgency and action and focusing on diversification. There's a sense of, this kind of moving back and forth, the kind of a reflective equilibrium between the security of Ukraine and the security of Europe, including not just questions on the gas supply, but also electricity. There is, I believe, a joint commitment, at least with respect to the U.S. government and the Commission, to get the Ukraine connected to the European grid and disconnected from the Russian electricity grid. Same approach that we've taken with respect to the Baltic states as well. I think that will increase over time, not only increase over time the security of Ukraine, but also increase the possibility that Ukraine can become eventually a center point for clean energy exports to Europe, for which they have ample supplies that we are committed to in terms of our bilateral relationship with Europe to try to help them to invest in. We also look at a couple different topics, happy to go into more detail later, on our cooperation on hydrogen, looking out to the longer term, which has been very robust the last few years, and we are looking for ways in which we can continue that work, especially in multilateral fora, like the Clean Energy Ministerial, Mission Innovation, the International Energy Agency, and our friends from IEA are here with us today, so that we can, as much as possible, create a coalition of like-minded countries who can work towards seeing deployment in the near term of cheap, affordable hydrogen that can replace and diversify some of the supply and obviously help us on the decarbonization agenda. With respect to other activities moving forward, we have an ample program of work, collaboration on reducing methane emissions, especially in the gas sector. This is incredibly important given the current reliance in Europe on gas, the current continued global use of gas, and to make sure that truly is a transition fuel and not just simply another high carbon alternative which unfortunately I think is what you're getting with the very dirty gas coming out of Russia right now. We think U.S. gas supplies, by the way, will be much more competitive in the world if we can reduce fugitive methane emissions and clean those up from everything from the wellhead to transportation, all the way moving forward to the way that it is combusted and used for energy. And we're committed to doing that through a bunch of different measures, including joint standards, but also common mitigation technologies. And then finally, in terms of identified projects here, we are agreed to work on just transition issues together, incredibly important. The US and Europe both face a situation where we have parts of our country that are still, and we are proud of our fossil workers in the United States. As we see a transition to cleaner energy, whether it's abated coal and gas, or whether it's renewable, non-fossil energy sources, we want to see a transition that keeps all communities afloat, that leaves no one behind. And certainly the Europeans are already there and have already had some great successes in that respect that we can learn from. And then finally, I should sort of say that looking forward, also attached to this process, and this is one of the brilliant pieces in Ambassador Morningstar, maybe this was your idea there, but it always attached to this process is also a business-to-business engagement. It doesn't happen at the same time as the government-to-government engagement for every one of these council meetings. So we are looking to April, where this will be led by Secretary Granholm and Commissioner Simpson, a major event which we will be announcing later in the United States on offshore wind, really focused on bringing together the business communities between the US and the EU, again, where we have a lot to learn from each other. In fact, in there, we're looking for foreign direct investment from Europeans into the United States to help us to build out our offshore wind ambition. And that just speaks to the back and flow that constantly we have to have between us responding to the near-term emergencies and potential crises, to also the longer term, which will make sure that we are not in a situation where anyone's energy supplies can be as transparently weaponized, frankly, as they are right now, as we're seeing in the case right now with respect to Russia.
Well, thank you, Assistant Secretary Light. A lot was packed into the statement, as you suggested. I think it was like 3 or 4 pages long, but it's very densely packed in. You covered a lot of ground. I'm going to ask Maya if she wouldn't mind putting the link into the statement in perhaps the chat function, so our participants could have a look at. And I think you're right, you touched on many of the issues that were in there that hopefully we can draw out during the discussion. But without further ado, I think I'll turn to Dagmara Kosko. Dagmara, do you feel that the US and EU, or should I say the EU and US Energy Council, showed sufficient unity of purpose, particularly in these short-term energy issues we're facing right now? And if you could say something about the balance you felt was struck between the short-term crunch and the longer-term objectives and shared strategies. Dagmara.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're listening to us from Europe. I am delighted to be with you here this morning. 2 last days were particularly intensive indeed, because we had a council on Monday, and we had the high-level visitors from Europe visiting for Monday and Tuesday, with a bunch of meetings, extremely thrilling times for us. If you wanted to walk away from this discussion right now, I would say just leave with one sentence from me. The EU-US Energy Council is and has been revitalized, and it has been really an engine for progress for us, and we really remain hopeful that this is gonna be the case this year, 2022, year of implementation on international stage when it comes to climate ambition. And it remains strategic and important to both sides of the Atlantic. Let me just maybe share on what you suggested, Claire, 3 reflections. Well, first of all, we are, I think, more aligned than ever, both on those long-term strategic objectives, as well as short-term issues and answers to those issues that we need to face. And I think Andrew has walked us through some of those very intense discussions about the preparedness, about the contingency planning, about the different scenarios that we are right now elaborating and dealing with and trying to find answers to. Number two, and this is relates to the introduction by Ambassador Morningstar. The energy security component of this coordination and conversation remains as important as ever. The Council was indeed established in 2009, and Ambassador Morningstar mentioned it, but the reason why it was established was because also in Europe in 2006 and 2009, we had a very serious natural gas supply crisis. And so the Europe, the European Union and the United States of America have decided to work together on increasing energy security to the region, to the European Union, and to the European neighborhood. And you will see the gist of that work also still in the joint statement. And it was indeed I would say at least half of the discussion was related to energy security. However, with those 12, 13 years that have passed, the energy security threats have evolved. And also we are in a completely different place today than we were in 2009. Europe is in particular, but also the diversification is a completely different one today. And I am happy to say more about this because this is indeed something we feel very proud of. But we also think that the cooperation between the EU and the US have been quite vital to where we are right now. And the third thought and reflection that I would like to leave with you is that I see a complete paradigm shift in terms of energy policy collaboration and collaboration on energy technologies. This is an area that has been intensely prepared in advance to the Council. There have been a number of working group and technical level meetings in the run-up to the Council. And from the joint statement that Andrew referenced, you will see that those work streams have been named and there's a concrete deliverables and expectations expressed with respect to those work streams. Andrew named some of those areas. Offshore wind is among them. Hydrogen and methane are among them. But of course, we also feel very, very excited about the energy efficiency. I mentioned there decarbonization of buildings and construction materials. And I think what I would like to say maybe is that this is a transition we are on, and I think you see that this gist of the green transition is mentioned from the very beginning of the statement until the very end of the statement. And I think you have to understand that even if we are still talking about the energy security concerns, we feel that the energy security is inherently linked to, in fact, transitioning towards net zero in 2050. And therefore, energy security, the best energy security reply to the concerns that we are facing is in the long term, in fact, transition to renewable and green energy and clean supplies. And I think with this, let's dive into the discussion.
Thank you, Dagmara. I mean, it's good that you mentioned that, we've been here before. Like you said, the genesis of the Energy Council was to look at these energy security issues. And you said that was 12 to 13 years ago. And yet still, when you look at the energy mix in key markets in Europe, Germany, for example, is still heavily dependent, reliant on this single source, this dominant source. I'm going to ask just Ambassador, if you wouldn't mind coming in before we turn back to the IEA. I'm struck, Andrew, you talk about the weaponization of this asset, gas. And Secretary Blinken talked in the press conference afterwards about Russia's energy leverage. So, Ambassador, like, what's your view on sort of the state of play right now and the balance between the short-term need for gas to get us through the winter, to prepare in case there is a massive disruption to Europe and its eastern flank? What's your takeaway about this language that we're using being weaponized and the leverage? And is this time different, do you think, or are we going to find ourselves back here when the crisis dissipates?
Oh, we've Claire, we certainly used that term for many years. And I think we need to be realistic and accept that that energy has been weaponized. I mean, we can go into the details, but I think it's really obvious, and to deny it, I think, would be somewhat naive. Let me say a couple of things to emphasize a couple of things. First of all, I was very excited and encouraged to hear what Andrew and Dagmara had to say. It's clear that the Energy Council is reinvigorated and can play a major role with respect to coordination. I think it's also important to recognize that the success of the Energy Council, frankly, is not ultimately going to be through principals meetings, although they're important obviously to lay the groundwork. It's going to be the follow through at levels below the principals. Back during the Obama administration, that's where we were most successful. We met probably by phone or in person once or twice a month to talk about energy security issues at that time and how to make sure that we were coordinated. And again, Ukraine, even back then, was maybe the biggest issue that we talked about. Let me emphasize a couple of things, maybe in somewhat direct language, because no longer in the government I can say what I want to say. First of all, that I think this balance between the short term, midterm, and long term is critical. And obviously, in the short term, the issue of immediate energy security in Europe is hugely important. I was encouraged by what Andrew said about the number of cargoes that have been shifted towards Europe, that there's been some stabilization in price, that as a result that cargoes have been able to be shifted from Asia, and it is a market decision ultimately, where these cargoes go, and it does look like Europe's in okay shape, even if Ukraine transit at 40 BCM a year is shut down. The issue would be if there were greater shutoffs, which we obviously need to work on. I would just want to say categorically that I think we need to recognize, and I think it was certainly recognized in the joint statement that was issued by the president and President Biden and the president of the commission last week. Gas is important. There is no way around the reality that certainly in the short to midterm, gas and gas supply is going to continue to be important, both to create alternatives from an energy security standpoint, and to create alternatives to Russian gas from the standpoint of substituting for coal production, all of which is going to be important. The second point that I think we need to keep making loud and clear, and I think you both have basically done so, gas and the energy transition and the development of green technologies is not an either-or proposition. It really has to be both. And in fact, as important as gas may be in the short to midterm, it's equally, maybe even more important, that we double down on the development of green technologies, because the greater the green technologies, one, obviously positive from a climate change standpoint, but also from an energy security standpoint. And the more the green technologies, the less the dependence on Russia. I mean, it's a very, in Europe, I mean, it's a very that's a very simple proposition. So I think we really need to double down on both fronts. Finally, I think that it is important. Messaging is important, and that the joint statement of the two presidents was very helpful. But I think it even has to go somewhat beyond that. The President of the United States, I think, has to be crystal clear that the export of U.S. natural gas is in the U.S. national security interest, and supplying Europe with necessary gas and other places in the world is in our energy security interest and in our national security interest. And also to emphasize that if, with respect to gas resources, that it's also critically important that any new gas projects be decarbonized as much as possible, and that we have standards working with our European friends with respect to methane emissions, with respect to carbon capture, with respect to any other activities that will in fact decarbonize gas, and recognize that the dirtiest gas in the world is coming from the east into Europe. So I think that all that is critical. I was frankly surprised, and I was 14 years in the government as a Democratic political appointee, so I have good relationships with Democrats on the Hill and so forth. I was very disappointed with the letter from 10, I think, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they were all Democrats, letter to President Biden saying that there should be no export of natural gas. I mean, how could there be any worse timing for a letter like that, given what's happening in Europe right now? I think we have to recognize how important that is. So I think I've been pretty direct. I think covered the main points that I'm concerned about, and I turn it back to Claire and Keisuke.
And I have to say, I do love your directness. We need more of that, I think, sometimes. So equally directly, I'm going to bring in Keisuke, who's from the IEA, and you are our independent analyst here. What's your view of both the statement from the council meeting and just the ambassador's comments just now about gas? It's not an either or situation. I'd love to hear how you see, this pressure at the moment, and how it marries against your recent net zero roadmap, where the IEA was equally direct about the future market direction. So if we start there, but I also am going to turn now to the Q&A. I'm looking at the questions and the questions you're putting. Please do put more questions in the chat room. There's a question about energy security and how we can tackle energy security via the demand side. And again, energy efficiency, Dagmara sort of talked about energy efficiency, seems to always get short shrift in these discussions. So I'm going to start there, and then obviously we can draw out methane and hydrogen and the other technologies. But Keisuke, what's your initial reaction to Ambassador's comments and the statement from the Council?
Thank you, Claire. And first of all, thank you so much for including the IEA in these important discussions. And I'm happy to contribute as the United States and the countries of Europe are the important members of the IEA. So thank you very much for this. Now, as for the discussion, I fully agree with the ambassador in a sense that both the short-term energy supply security and the long-term energy security through the clean energy transitions, they're both very important in this respect. And in this very short term, we have seen the enormous contribution from the US LNG, because we saw, as our executive director pointed out, that the Russians' gas supply in the fourth quarter this winter was lower than the normal years, despite the fact that the gas prices in Europe is very, very high. They're kind of record-making price levels. And this was compensated mostly by the higher LNG imports. Actually, 3/4 of the lower import from Russia was provided by the imported LNG by Europe. And the United States LNG contributed about half of the extra LNG coming to Europe. So this is a very enormous the contribution to the European gas supply security. And not only that, I just saw on the Nikkei report that even the Japanese the energy minister agreed to the European ambassador and the US ambassador that the Japan will try to redirect some of the LNG cargo to the European continent. And this has been made possible by the increased the kind of more liquid and the flexible LNG gas markets, which was realized in the past several years based on the various kind of experiences of the natural gas crisis. Now, as Ambassador also pointed out, that this is not the first the gas supply crisis between Russia and Europe. We saw that in 2009. We also saw that back in 2014. And we have seen that the European gas systems have evolved to increase more resilience by the better interconnection of the gas networks. So now the reverse flows in certain gas pipelines capacities are available at this moment. But still, there's a lot of work to do in terms of enhancing the gas supply and energy security in Europe. And in the past, the natural gas supply crisis in Europe, at the IEA was asked to provide some analysis and reports on how the European gas supply security can be enhanced. And one of the major items is the increasing efficiency, in particular the residential sectors in Europe, because all those natural gas crises happen in winter. And this becomes a serious social problem because the switching, the residential heating from natural gas to suddenly to other fuels is very important. And therefore, in that respect, the enhancing the efficiency of the building sector and others is a very important part of the enhancing the energy security in the European continent, and of course in others as well. And also we need to diversify the various sources, and also in addition to that, the more electrification of various sectors of energy is also very important. Now, as for this electricity, we need more diverse electricity power generation sources. So, we can see that once the natural gas prices became higher, we saw that the coal-fired power plants suddenly started producing more electricity. So field switching happened. And of course, we are phasing out the coal-fired power plants in various parts of the world, including Europe. So in that respect, we will need more diverse, low-carbon power generation sources as well. So in that respect, we need kind of even faster clean energy transitions so that the European countries and others can reduce the dependency on the imported fossil fuels. So I'll stop it here. Thank you.
But okay, so you've said in the past that the IEA, just sticking with you, and we'll come back to Andrew and Dagmara then, about the investment gap, right? So we say we need to diversify, we need to switch, we need to do more on demand side, particularly at heating. I mean, I opened my gas bill yesterday and was shocked, like many people around the world. But what signals do we need to send to the market in order to close that investment gap? It seems to me in moments like this, markets are looking to see which way the winds are blowing, in order to switch, and put their money, on the future direction. So how do we close that gap? How do we get the investment into this infrastructure we're going to need in the future?
Well, thank you for asking the question. The net zero, the scenario of the IEA's World Energy Outlook, and also the net zero roadmap shows that the investments in clean energy technologies needs to triple by toward the 2030. So we need to see the enormous amount of increase in the investments in low carbon technologies. While if we take a look at the other side, the fossil fuels, oil and gas upstream, for instance, the level of investment is actually consistent with the net zero pathway. And this is not good. I mean, unless we see more accelerated, robust investments in clean energy side, there will be no secure and affordable supplies on the traditional fuels. So we will need to increase. Otherwise, we'll need to continue to invest in the kind of traditional energy sources as well. And the question about what should be done to facilitate, accelerate those investments, this is a very important and difficult question. But there's obviously a need for much robust government intervention into the market and send a very strong and credible these signals for accelerating investment so that the investors can have strong confidence that their money can be recovered in the long term, the projects. Because the issue with the low carbon energy technologies are that they mostly require the big amount of investment at the upfront. And this needs to be recovered by the kind of a long-term use of those assets because it doesn't require much of the marginal costs on the fuels. So there needs to be a very strong signal and predictable, transparent measures by the government to force the private sector to direct their money to the low carbon technologies.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, let's turn back to Assistant Secretary Light and Dagmara, just to get back to what was in the statement from the Council. I mean, it is about cooperation between US and Europe, right? Andrew, your job is in international affairs, looking at that levels of cooperation in order to deal with this whole suite of issues. In the chat function, people are asking about CCS and nuclear. Were these issues discussed? You've already raised about, so these other platforms for cooperation between governments in order to send the signal, Katsui said, for the which way we're going, which technologies. You've mentioned the SEM and MI. If you could say a bit more about the levels of cooperation, we're planning for the rest of the year, to get these technologies to market and to deploy faster the technologies we currently have in order to diversify and reduce demand. And the levels of cooperation we need to see to develop the new technologies, right? And again, we've referenced hydrogen. And so if you could say more about the other technologies that the Council discussed. Did they discuss CCS? Did they discuss nuclear? And what levels of cooperation are we looking for in these new technologies like hydrogen?
So I'm happy to say something briefly about this, and then we can go deeper if you'd like. I mean, I think that Keisuke is exactly right. We have to accelerate, our deployment of other technologies. We need to accelerate our investment in them. We need to accelerate deployment in them. I think we're doing pretty well. I don't think we face a gap at all in terms of cooperation or cooperative programs. In fact, we have an abundance of them. On hydrogen alone, we have like 4 or 5 international platforms at this point that are working on everything from standard setting at the front end to deployment issues on the back end. The Department of Energy has launched what we call an Earthshot on hydrogen, spending billions of dollars on demonstration projects, hydrogen hubs, hydrogen valleys, other sort of efforts through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which will, with an aim of driving down the cost of hydrogen to $1 per kilogram of hydrogen from renewables by the end of the decade. We're also involved in a cooperative project through Mission Innovation to drive down that cost to $2 per kilogram of hydrogen, end-to-end, including transportation, which is quite compatible with that, which we're doing with other parties. And we have a similar Earthshot to drive down the price on battery storage, and a similar Earthshot to drive down the price on on negative carbon technologies. So there's an abundance of cooperation both in and outside of this council, the US-EU Energy Council. And I should say, if we just wanted to focus on Europe, the United States this year launched high-level climate and energy dialogues with Germany, with the UK, with France, most of these at the ministerial level. We have something called the Partnership for Transatlantic Energy Cooperation, which the Trump administration started with over 20 Eastern and Central European countries, which was rechristened this past September in Warsaw by the Secretary of Energy and all participating ministers from some 24 countries as the Partnership for Transatlantic Energy and Climate Cooperation. So the number of platforms is there. The amount of cooperation is clearly there. The question is, how do you direct it most efficiently? And how do you get the most deployment as quickly as possible? And I think that is where we're seeing a lot. There was nothing that was not on the table on Monday, but there is, of course, things that we're trying to use this particular nexus between the U.S. and the Commission to move forward on particular things. We mentioned wind. We mentioned what we're doing on abated gas technologies. We mentioned hydrogen, but obviously also in discussion on the table, both in the actual council meeting and around, was energy efficiency as well. The first fuel, the cheapest thing we can do in order to increase the capacity for diversification. This is a very compelling intervention, in fact, made by Commissioner Simpson on this point alone. So I think that the question is not how can we ramp up platforms for cooperation as much as how we can get them to actually produce the results that we need. The United States has stepped up, and this is the last thing I'll say. Sorry for going on so long. We promised the world that we would get back into, aggressively international cooperation on climate and clean energy. And I think we've done that. In the case of the Department of Energy, and I've been working with Kiske and Fatih Birol and the great team at IEA on this, but Secretary Granholm is chairing this year's IEA Ministerial, where we will be announcing in March a suite of new mandates there that we are using to completely help to supercharge the IEA as an instrument to help to accelerate this transition and really work on everything that we need to do that, not only in terms of the dispatchable power, but the supply chains on critical minerals and materials, and really use the power of the IEA as a convening and the best resource that we have on the data side to do that. We will also chair the Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation combined ministerial in Pittsburgh in September. And on and again, we will be at work every single minute of every single day to try to direct these abundant cooperative platforms to actually delivering this year, not just commitments, which are promises, but actual results.
Okay, so on that note, I have to ask, you hit the nail on the head, right? The levels of cooperation are there between this administration and your peers in Europe. And last year we saw a whole suite of conferences and initiatives, lots of targets and goals and objectives. And so, but when we face a crunch like this, everyone's looking for, are people willing to make the tough decisions in order to meet these goals and objectives, right? And I'd put to you, I guess, and to Dagmara next, what are the critical deliverables we need to see from this council or the other cooperative platforms, right? And or let me put it a different way. While you were meeting in the State Department as the EU-US Energy Council, down the road, we had the new Chancellor Scholz meeting with the president, also talking about Russia, Ukraine, right? And like Germany, just take, this jurisdiction, they've had a decade, if not more, of the Energiewende, right? And yet still very dependent on Russian gas, right? So it's hard to transition, right? And obviously looking at other, their position on other fuels. But do you feel this time it's different? And what are you looking to see, say, from Germany or even indeed the European Union? And I'm going to put the question to you, Dagmara, as well. Like the European Union has their Fit for 55, right? Germany has its targets. Everyone's committed to net zero in 2050. And yet here we are in 2022 with a short-term crunch. And so how do we sort of double down on that transition? Like how do we know? How does the market know? If I'm an investor, I don't want to put money into something that's going to be stranded in a few years. So what concrete deliverables are you looking to see over the next 2 years to know that we are transitioning?
Well, briefly also to say that again, we're not going to hydrogen is not going to solve the energy price problems in Europe today, right? This is a longer term play, obviously, as well as all the other clean energy, future oriented platforms that we can imagine. There is no shortage of investment in these technologies right now. The question is, how do we accelerate the transition? And that's something that government can help to do. That is, in fact, why we're doing these Earthshot programs, to drive the price down using government intervention as fast as possible so that the investments can yield results quicker than they ordinarily would. That makes them more attractive. So I don't think the formula is terribly complicated in that respect. With respect to the current, the situation there, we are also pushing, and this is not obviously something we'll be doing with the German government, but throughout the region, we are pursuing an abundance of deals on nuclear energy, which is something we have ready at hand, ready to move out, ready to build, that will, take some time, but also will provide more immediate relief with respect to energy diversification. So this is something we're doing with Poland right now and pursuing a very large traditional AP1000 project there with Westinghouse that we hope will land, but then obviously something we're doing with our small modular reactor technology, which should be coming online, soon into this decade. So I think that the investment is there. The question is, how do you accelerate this to a deployment phase as fast as possible? That's what things like the EU-US Energy Council are determined to do on an array of platforms.
Thank you. Okay, so Dagmar, a lot's come out in the discussion. I'm sure you've got other thoughts. I would also say, do you feel, are you getting the signals from the US as your counterparty that it is serious about the transition and, setting the signals and making the investments to transition at this moment, to diversify with renewable sources, etc.? And I'd also ask you, I was struck by the level of detail in the statement on particular things like methane. It feels like, the global methane pledge is, I think, a good example of where US and European cooperation, bringing in over 100 countries from around the world, is a good example of a new initiative, a new pledge. But it's felt a bit like in the statement, you're serious now about getting into the weeds. It talked about methodologies and, how we're going to measure, how we're going to monitor. So, if you could say bigger picture, how you felt, is this moment different from before? And then, specifically about the methane pledge, is that real? Is that going to have teeth?
Excellent questions. I would love to take a lot of space to discuss them, but let me first maybe start with a consideration. What we're facing in Europe right now is not a infrastructure crisis. We have the infrastructure. The infrastructure to carry gas to Europe is simply underutilized from the eastern directions. It's at historic lows, around 40 or less % of utilization. So this is a result of demand and supply picking up after the pandemic, also result of switch to natural gas, as natural gas is a cleaner burning fuel. And of course, we see that it replaces coal, which is a very, very good development. So we are, of course, facing a situation during a heating season, and it's true that those crunches have in the past historically happened during the heating season. Why? Because Europe is using natural gas for heating. 25% of natural gas consumed in Europe goes into households for heating. And so for us, the answer to that is, of course, energy efficiency, an area that for the first time ever, we are discussing with the EU and US together. We have a very ambitious outlook for this cooperation. So I'm very excited about it. And indeed, in Europe, we have already a strategy for almost every of those critical areas, for specifically for energy efficiency. We have a renovation wave. We want to double the renovation by 2030, the renovation wave of all buildings. And that will save us the deliveries from one of those most hotly discussed pipelines from the eastern directions that you might imagine, which I mean. So just a few reflections on that. When it comes to investments, let me provide some reflections as well. We in Europe see solar and wind already delivering the results that we that are essentially underlying why the green transition is so beneficial for everyone. We see offshore wind in the North Sea delivering base load, electricity at prices which are lower than natural gas. What we are all concerned about is, of course, affordability. And I think this crunch has showed to the European Union and to the EU member states that we do care about, how much our households are paying for heating, for electricity. This is critically important for industry. As you know, Europe has a very robust approach to our industries, and our decarbonization objectives should not undermine our leadership in the industrial area. So all this fits nicely together with the approach that we've proposed, right? So in terms of investments on solar, on offshore wind, we have those long-term targets. And when we talk to industry, and really believe me, in the past 2 days, the commissioner and I were exposed very much to the views from the industry. This is what the industry needs in order to plan for those investments. Capital costs are still very high. They need to also invest in R&D. If they have a robust legislative regulatory framework, they are able to plan for those investments that can only be recuperated in 10, 15, maybe 20, sometimes even 30 years. And let me say that on that front, of course, Europe has been also very explicit in the last weeks about what role we see for some of those critical technologies that can bring emissions down, like natural gas, like nuclear. I would like to mention the taxonomy. Some of you who are sitting in this room and are experts in this know what I refer to. I think it's a critically important signal to investors that provides 3 decades of visibility for those investments, and even more for generation 4 of nuclear that doesn't have any sunset clause in this one legal act that we're discussing. So maybe let me pivot towards methane, because we have
just a minute on methane. I'm surprised you brought in the taxonomy. That's a whole other seminar. That's a whole other webinar on the taxonomy.
Absolutely.
1 minute on the methane, and then we'll have closing just remarks from everybody else.
Absolutely. So on methane, I think all of you who have watched COP26 or participated in live have noticed that one of those biggest splashes, I would say, was the announcement of the global methane pledge. So why do we bilaterally between EU and US need to still continue working together on top of everything else that happens under the international umbrella? And over 111 countries joined the global methane pledge. Well, because we can set standards. We are the ones that can lead others into areas that are more ambitious, because we should be the ones setting the agenda, right? So on methane specifically, the EU and US have agreed to work on the LCA, which is life cycle analysis, across the value chain, the supply chain of carbohydrates that are supplied to the world regions. And number 2, we are working also on metrology. Metrology is important because this is equipment that tests and can get equipment that essentially can deliver those reductions. So there are test centers that need to really be sure that the equipment that they're testing, reductions of methane emissions, that we know that this is really a very reliable equipment that we are dealing with. There's a lot of progress there. So I think we're very excited about that chunk of our work that clearly is very bilateral.
That is an area where I think it definitely felt a bit more concrete. We had to, Assistant Secretary Light had to leave a couple of minutes earlier. So in his absence, I want to say thank you for his time. And I think we've come up to the end. Ambassador Morningstar, do you want to say anything just to wrap up, other than to thank our panelists for their time and to thank the Atlantic Council and all our colleagues that helped put this together? I'm going to give you the last word, Ambassador, but thank you for everybody. There were lots of other questions we didn't get to, also about what US and Europe could do for other countries like the Western Balkans and Lebanon and the Middle East. But Ambassador.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you again for working with us on this program, which I think was outstanding. And I am really encouraged. I'm encouraged by the enthusiasm of both Andrew and Dagmara and the commitment to follow through on the issues that we've been talking about. There is a lot more that we could be discussing. I have one thing that I would have wanted to make a strong point on, but maybe it's too late to do so right now. But in any event, I think we should also thank our staffs who've put this together. Maya Sparkman has done just a great job for us, as well as our IT folks. And I know your staff has also worked extremely hard on this. So I want to thank everybody, KSK and the IEA as well, and your contribution. So I think we need to have more of these discussions to follow up.
I do too. I feel like we scratched the surface, so maybe we can all come back together in a few weeks and pick up another strand. For now, though, thank you everybody for your time. Goodbye.
Thank you.